Game mechanics. TF2 sure has a couple of them. You have the basic mechanics, like health and ammo and classes and stuff. The more advanced mechanics, like air strafing and damage fall off. And then you have the mechanics that are so obscure that most people who've ever played the game don't know they even exist. For instance, did you know that getting a kill resets the cooldown of your spray? You do now. But as you might expect, not every mechanic in this spaghetti bowl of a game can be a winner. Random crits receive the brunt of the hate, being the topic of every other discussion ever held on TF2. But digging deeper into the hellscape of niche game mechanics reveals that there are things that are far more annoying. So I wanted to give my opinion on what I find to be the worst mechanics ever added to the game. But before I start, let me set a few rules on what I chose. First of all, no ranting about weapons. I like ranting about weapons as much as the next guy, but everyone and their grandmother has already done that, so I'm going to avoid it here. Second of all, I'm not going to be talking about glitches, only the intentional mechanics as well as the results of those mechanics that Valve may not have considered. That means stuff like quantum crouching, as game-breaking as it is off the table since no one at Valve sat down and decided that it should be a game feature. And finally, this is just my opinion, so if you happen to like a particular mechanic I put on the list, you're probably a psychopath, but you're allowed to disagree. Alright, let's go. The year was 2011. Doge was the funniest thing anyone had ever seen, half the community tab was filled with My Little Pony roleplay servers, and Valve was cooking up something devious. What if, instead of just adding new weapons, we added entire item sets to the game that also had a cosmetic included? And what if equipping every single item in that set at the same time gave you a bonus ranging from completely useless to incredibly broken? And what if the cosmetics that you have to own to get the stat boost were only obtainable from the Manco store for $7.50 a pop? Well, that's genius, pump that update out by Friday. Yeah, this game used to be pay to win for a while, with certain items giving you insane bonuses if you had the entire thing equipped. The Sydney Sleeper set, for instance, just made you completely immune to headshots even if you only had 1 HP remaining. This is pretty common knowledge by now, since a lot of people have rightfully ridiculed this questionable decision, but it would be a sin not to bring this up on a worst mechanics list. People really don't like RNG in this game, do they? Random crits are the poster child for unfair RNG because it's something that happens pretty often and can be super impactful every time it does. Random bullet spread, the younger brother of random crits, is also something that's had quite the controversy, with some people claiming that it affects basically nothing, while others say that it makes the entire game unplayable. But there is a third RNG mechanic that's been mostly lost to the vaults of time, and that's random damage spread. Random damage spread takes your nice consistent damage numbers and says, yeah, that's cool and all, but what if you had a 50% chance to get completely screwed over for no reason? How this mechanic works is that it takes whatever damage you would have dealt normally, multiplies it by plus or minus 15%, and deals that as damage instead. Now, most of the time, this isn't too much of a problem. Whether each bullet from your SMG does 7, 8, or 9 damage is rarely going to affect the outcome of your battles. But sometimes it does matter, and when it matters, it really matters. Grenades are the most prominent example, since by default they deal a nice and even 100 damage each. You will always kill a soldier in exactly 2 pipes and a heavy in exactly 3. But when you throw random damage spread onto the pile, you really start to complicate things. With damage spread on, whether or not you can kill a soldier with 2 pipes is now a coin flip, with a very real possibility that you deal 198 damage to the dude you're shooting and die before you can kill him. So in this case, random damage spread directly hurts the attacker, but with weapons like the Huntsman, the pendulum swings the other way instead, giving fully charged body shots a 40% chance to one-shot light classes in exchange for no meaningful downside at all. But then you have the normal sniper rifles, which have a 50% chance to not kill a medic on a body shot, with the exception of the Machina, which has a 45% chance to kill demos and pyros on a body shot. Yeah, can you see why this system sucks yet? A lot of otherwise consistent high damage options become either completely unreliable or occasionally broken with the damage thresholds that are modified. And don't even get me started on the old lock and load and equalizer, which each had a chance of removing light classes from the face of the planet if they rolled high enough. Seriously, don't get me started on these. I already made an entire video on them, and I do not have the blood pressure to go on that rant again. I hate skeletons. These bony boys are something you see on a lot of Halloween maps, and that sucks because these guys are completely unbearable to play against. A single skeleton isn't so bad. It only has 50 health, moves as fast as a sniper, and only deals either 20 or 30 damage on hit. But let me ask you something, dear viewer. When is there ever just one skeleton? These things will absolutely swarm you with no remorse, making their combined damage actually pretty threatening, since groups of them can kill light classes in less than a second. But by far the worst part about these hell spawns is that they are incredibly obnoxious to kill. The hitbox of the small skeleton is microscopic, you don't get any feedback for damaging them, and these things have the jankiest hit detection imaginable. In fact, soldiers, engineers, pyros, and heavies are the only class that can actually deal with groups of more than 2 to 3 skeletons at a time. If you're playing a class that doesn't have some kind of splash damage or automatic targeting, there is literally nothing you can do if you happen to get swarmed. And all of this isn't even to mention the Skeleton King, which has slightly better hit detection in exchange for instantly killing you if he touches you. Anytime I see skeletons on a map, a small part of me dies inside. The sheer existence of these things settings forces you to battle the map itself more than the other team, which at a game like TF2 is an absolute drag. If you're making a Halloween map yourself, don't pull an ICS and please reconsider adding these stupid gremlins. They're not fun and they only serve to make an otherwise decent map completely unplayable. Sticking to the Halloween theme, the boss fight maps had a mechanic added that utterly ruined them. Truces are conceptually a terrible idea, and I have no idea how they managed to make it into the final game. The way they work is pretty straightforward. If a boss currently exists on the map, neither team is allowed to attack each other until the boss either leaves or is defeated. Now this on its own is already pretty bad, because contrary to the belief of friendlies, the thing I want to be doing in a first-person shooter is shooting people in first person. But I guess Valve assumed that fighting Obnoxious and the other team at the same time was frustrating to the people trying to do either of those things exclusively, so they wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page with who should be shooting what. Which, okay, on a surface level that makes some sense, making sure everyone's playing the same game is an admirable goal, but when you get to the nitty-gritty of how a truce actually affects a round, you start to see why these things are a problem. Anytime a truce is initiated at all, the central control point becomes neutral and can't be captured by either team until the truce is over. While this makes sense on paper, considering that without the ability to attack each other, it'd be unfair for one team to get free time, all this ends up doing is stalling out the round even longer. But what really makes this frustrating is when you combine all of that with how often the bosses spawn, which is once every 60 to 90 seconds. For context, to win a game of Ghost Fort, the map Marasmus spawns on, your team needs to hold the point for a bloody 7 minutes. That is a ridiculous amount of time without the truces, but when you add them in, you get a map that can have rounds that last up to an hour apiece. And Ghost Fort is a King of the Hill map, mind you, so the rounds that should be going maybe 10 minutes at most can last as long as a stalematy map like Powerhouse or Turbine. At least community creators do seem to be catching on to how bad truces can make the game, since last year the creator of Slasher completely removed him from the map, thank God. But the truce mechanic being on any map at all is too much, and I'm frankly tired of having to clear my entire day's schedule just to play a round of Ghost Fort. Even though I could rant about Halloween all day, what with the abundance of free crits and instant kill bombs being spammed everywhere constantly, the last and easily the worst mechanic I'll add to the list is the old haunted Halloween gift mechanic that was used until 2015. Sit down, kiddos, it's time for Grandpa to tell you a story. Back in my day, before these newfangled Halloween contracts and Miraz missions, we had to fight tooth and nail for our Halloween rewards. Instead of soul gargoyles giving everyone a participation trophy, only one item spawned at a time, and whoever got to it first was the one to win it. Now you might be asking yourself, what happens if a gift spawned behind enemy lines and you couldn't get to it because the sentries were roughing you up? Well, that was just too dang bad. Whoever got the item was up to God himself, and sometimes there just wasn't nothing you could do about it. Okay, I'm getting tired of doing the grandpa bit. Yeah, so for some reason Valve decided that the best way to give out free items during Halloween events was to spawn a single gift item somewhere on the server and just give it to the first person to find it. Servers would go into a frenzy every time a gift spawned. It wasn't uncommon for everyone in the match to just completely abandon the objective and run around like headless chickens to try to get a free item. Oh, and whatever dropped was also tradable back then, so not getting the item meant that you were actually missing out on the equivalent to real-life money. That would be like running into a Walmart and announcing over the intercom that you hit $1,000 in one of the aisles, and whoever finds it first gets to keep the money. Actually, scratch that. That gives me a video idea. But yeah, this was a terrible idea that no human being should have ever approved of, and I am astonished that the game actually functioned like this for a while. Is there anyone that plays this game that actually likes melee hit detection? Nope, stop typing. I see you in the comments trying to be a contrarian. I know hit detection bad is a pretty tired point by now, and you could even make the argument that bad hit registration was never something Valve intended the game to have. However, there is a very much intentional portion of melee hit detection spaghetti code that's arguably the worst part about it. The way that melee hit registration works is by drawing a line from the eyeball of the person swinging the weapon to about 48 hammer units in the direction of their crosshair. If another player's hitbox happens to intersect with this line, then melee registers a hit and you deal the damage accordingly. At least in the theory, stuff like interpolation complicates this process a lot, but for the sake of keeping things simple, let's just assume that everything always works as intended. But what is the melee hit detection to do if there are multiple players intersecting the magic line? Well, you don't want to have a single swing hit multiple people, so the simple answer is to only register the hit on the closest player. And yeah, that's what they made it do, which is a terrible decision considering that teammates also count as players. If you're fighting a group of enemies by yourself, then sure, the system works perfectly fine, but if your teammate Timmy Gonzalez 2009 is also in the general vicinity of the enemy you're trying to chop, things get very messy very quickly. Who do you think is going to absorb the most melee hits? The enemy player who's actively trying to back away from you trying to smack him, or the friendly player who has no collision whatsoever and can be as close to your eyeball as he wants? If you said the enemy player, then let me know what color of crayon tastes the best, because the answer is that teammates nearly always eat your melee hits by intentional design of the game. Don't believe me? Play a single round of the group keep and watch as the 12 defenders on the point struggle to kill the single guy trying to cap. It is hilariously bad when you ramp it up up to this scale. So yeah, if you're one of the many people who likes to complain about melee hit registration but doesn't know exactly why it's as bad as it is, well, now you do, or at least kind of, because there are a lot of reasons, but this is one of them. This one is pretty cut and dry. By default, whenever you capture the intel on a capture the flag map, your entire team becomes crit boosted for 10 seconds. What does this add to the gameplay experience, you might ask? Nothing. It adds nothing. I don't know why this is a mechanic. If you're trying to play the objective, it effectively turns one capture into 3, since enemies tend to struggle against an entire team of crit boosted players for some reason. If you're playing capture the flag as a deathmatch mode like 99% of the people who play the game do, though, then it just adds to the headache whenever a free-to-play scout ends up sneaking by your team and getting the intel. No matter which way you slice the cake, this is a pointless mechanic that should have been turned off by default years ago. Okay, I know balance probably isn't the first word that comes to people's minds when playing Manpower, but overall the mode is actually pretty well put together. That being said, there are a few exceptions that want to make me punch a hole in my monitor, and the comeback mechanic is one of them. Imagine you're playing a normal round of TF2. You're doing really well, executing perfect movement around enemies, and racking up a pretty good 12 kill streak. Now imagine that the game decided that you're doing too well, and to balance things out, it marks you for death every time you respawn and makes your weapons only deal half the normal damage. That is basically what Manpower's dominance penalty is. Every once in a while, the game will check to see the average amount of kills people are getting within a 5-minute span of time. If any player's doing at least 3 times better than that average, the game will slap him with the dominant status to even things out for a bit. But how bad could the dominant status really be? It's not like it effectively bars you from picking up power-ups in a power-up based game mode, right? Wrong, it does do that, kinda. If you pick up a power-up while in dominant status, not only is the effect of the power-up diminished to not really mattering anymore, but you're also marked for death for some reason. Now, some power-ups have it much better than others. Agility and Supernova don't change at all, probably because they're not amazing to start with, but a power-up like Resistance, on the other hand, becomes completely useless if you pick it up. Oh yeah, and the dominant status lasts for 10 minutes. The amount of time you're being punished for is double the amount of time you're actually playing the game normally. At least it's not as bad as real life, where killing one person gets you put in dominant status for 80 years. Now I get that it is very easy for an experienced player to completely wipe the floor in Manpower if they get an OP weapon and power-up combination. And when I was recording footage for this, I would be lying if I said that I wasn't excited when the mega sweaty players on the enemy team got nerfed. But was it really necessary to mark dominant players for death when they have power-ups? Nerfing the singular tool you're given to actually compete in this hellspawn of a game mode is already a significant penalty. Taking mini crits on top of that just for existing makes most power-ups not even worth picking up. This mechanic is easily one of the biggest downsides of the mode, and I really hope the single active developer working on Manpower has a change of heart about it at some point. You know how I just said that the dominant status was the worst part about Manpower? Well, I wasn't lying, it definitely is. But the fact that you can latch onto other players with your grappling hook is easily a close second. Grappling hooks as movement tools are really cool, and there's something I wish the game utilized more often. But why did Valve find it necessary to let you hook onto other players for what's basically a free kill? Directly hitting someone with the grappling hook not only lets you constantly home into their exact location, not only does it deal constant damage to your target, which has a pretty good chance of killing them on its own, not only are you able to switch to other weapons while you're still reeling into the player you've hooked, but it's also pretty much inescapable and will result in your immediate death more often than not. You do not know true pain until a pyro grapples onto you with his hook and burns you to a crisp as you flail around trying to get him off of you. This is a ridiculous and completely unnecessary mechanic that's only beat out by the aforementioned dominant status and the accursed reflect power-up. So anyway, that's most of the mechanics in TF2 that I think the game would probably be better off without. However, I have a couple honorable mentions. Sometimes I wonder why I even bother playing this game. Are there other mechanics that suck that I probably forgot about? Well, I don't remember, so let me know if I ended up leaving out anything major. I wanted to mostly stick with mechanics that fall in between Dead Horse and so obscure it's basically nitpicking, so stuff like random crits was mostly off the table. At some point, I want to make the inverse video where I talk about glitches or unintentional mechanics that suck, because there happen to be a lot of weird ones in this game's linguini code, but that's a video for another day, and is definitely one that you should let me know if you want to see. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like. If you hated this video, you clearly didn't find it, and most importantly, have a good one.